Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to review the 5-point pattern. I call this the speculation pattern, and we're going to look at the phenomena of staying in an abusive relationship. Now, my focus here will be I'll look at why women stay in an abusive relationship, but you can easily apply this pattern to straight relationships, gay relationships, LGBTQ, or why men stay in an abusive relationship. But right now, to help everyone focus, we're going to look at just why women stay in an abusive relationship. Okay? So we're looking at the phenomena of staying. Remember, don't get this mixed up with domestic violence. That's a different topic. Okay? So I'll just quickly go over the pattern. Number one, we're going to present the event, trend, or phenomena. In this case, the phenomena staying. Number two, we're going to argue for hidden drivers, or what would drive this phenomena. Number three, we're going to look at long-term consequences. Okay? And number four, we're going to have a counter-argument. So we're going to look at alternative explanations for the phenomena or alternative long-term consequences. And then number five, we're going to argue for calls to action. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is all to help you organize. So we're looking at the phenomena of why women stay in abusive relationships. Okay, so all you do here is you use two key statistics and maybe one analogy, or in this case, maybe quote the actual question. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. So the two key statistics you're looking for is how many attempts does it take on average to leave an abusive relationship. The source's domestic violence hotline says it takes an average of 7.5 attempts to leave an abusive relationship. So you start to see you can't just leave. It takes 7.5 attempts on average to leave an abusive relationship. And also the other statistic you'll use here in presenting the event, trend, or phenomena, in this case, you'll use the statistic of how many women are killed, seriously assaulted, injured every year. And you can get those statistics. Right now, we're looking at the United States. Okay? And then the third part of this is you do not use an illustration, but try to get a quote of that phenomena. For example, Leslie Morgan Steiner in the Crazy Love TED Talk, also Steiner has a book called Crazy Love. Steiner, you can use Steiner here, quoting Steiner, where one of Steiner's friends comes up to Steiner and says, "Why couldn't you just leave? Why didn't you just leave?" Because that's the common perception people have. Well, couldn't you just leave? Why can't you just leave? And then, of course, Steiner responds by saying, because it's very dangerous. Because the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is when they leave or attempt to leave, or even after they've left. Okay, that's a very dangerous time. Okay, so here, that's number one. You present, in this case, the phenomena. Number two, you're going to argue for hidden drivers. In this case, the subtitle will be Cycles of Abuse. Notice it's plural, because it's not just cycle of abuse, it's cycles of abuse. And underneath this section, again, you use the bolded subtitles. You'll go in and find the vetted sources. So, for example, you would use Lenora Walker's Cycle of Abuse. Professor Lenora Walker. So this will be one source paragraph. Another one you might use is a violence wheel. That's also from a professor. So you describe the violence wheel, how that functions. Then you can use the power and control wheel. Okay, that's another source. And they're distinct, they're different. They function the same way, but they have different definitions. For example, the power and control wheel looks at toxic masculinity. Violence wheel, of course, looks at violent masculinity. Then, of course, you can bring in the classic Stockholm Syndrome. And from the Stockholm Syndrome, you can also use an example. For example, you can use the infamous Patty Hearst example. Or you can use Michelle Berry's escape. Michelle Berry and 2 other females were in prison for over 10 years from Ariel Castro in Ohio. So that's an example of the cycle of abuse. So the point is, these each will be 1 paragraph. They're all sourced out. Now, if you were writing a 30-page essay, then of course each one of these would be a separate bolded subtitle and be made up of 2, 3, 4 paragraphs each. But in this case, you just want to keep it short. Now, be careful here. Do not over-summarize, over-paraphrase any of these, because what's going to happen is you don't want to just describe each step in each cycle. You want to just get an overall key description, but the key points you want to make in, and you can find a source that makes this claim, very important claim statement, or you can make it yourself, is the longer any woman is in any of these cycles, guess what? The likelihood, okay, did I spell it right? They'll stay. That's important to make the claim statement, because that ties in all of these. And of course, you can use Leslie Morgan Steiner's. Leslie Morgan Steiner calls it stages, but it functions as a cycle. So Leslie Morgan Steiner has 4 distinct stages. Okay, you start to see, all you have is 1 bolded subtitle, but each one of these will be a paragraph. And of course, you just need 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, 4, so you don't need to continue to use all of these, okay? So now your argument is complete for your hidden drivers, because again, you're arguing the longer any woman is in any of these cycles, the likelihood is they'll stay. The longer they'll stay, okay? Now, you notice here these arrows. The driver, this goes up to this phenomena. You notice there are no arrows going between number 2 or number 3, between the driver and the consequence. This is not a cause and effect pattern. If you see a close relationship before you lose control, you identify, you call it a cycle, and you put it either in the driver or the long-term consequence. So in this case, I see a close relationship, how the cycles function. So I'll name it cycles of abuse. I'm in control, you're in control, and you put it here. You notice there's no communication across this pyramid. From the phenomena of staying, you come down and you go long-term for number 3, which is, in this case, I would say just you look at impact on children, okay? And there's sources that will state the impact on children, because what's happening is the children are traumatized, okay? So you have trauma, okay? So in this case, if a boy or girl witnesses this abuse, specifically the boys have a 20% chance of becoming an abuser as they grow up. They learn behavior. The females, just generally, they'll learn submissive behavior or avoidance. Or it's hard to tell how trauma will function. Okay, Leslie Morgan Steiner, in the TED Talk, Crazy Love, you can use an example of Leslie Morgan Steiner's abusive husband, Connor. He was a prime example of this trauma, because when he was growing up, his father physically beat him, and he became an abuser. So I mean, it's just like you're using an illustration, an example, okay? You can also look at costs. Now, the analogy you would use is people calling in sick. There's statistics and resources for that, and approximately it's $1 billion a year in the United States. That's the cost to businesses by by people calling and say, oh, I got a cold, I got a cough, I got to go to the emergency room, I'm calling in sick. So the cost is quantifiable, $1 billion at least in the United States. So what you do is you do a correlation, you do an analogy, because a woman who's been abused more likely will call in sick because they got a black eye, they got marks on their throat, they have to go to the emergency, they have to go to surgery, they got a broken collarbone, broken hyperextended shoulder, broken bone, injury. So they'll have to go to the hospital. So they're going to call in sick. So here you see there's a loss. There's a cost there. You can also argue for cultural costs, because when you take 50% of any population and you oppress them, or you try to make them small, not all 50%, but I think women are 51%. You're going to damage that society, because then you're going to restrict women from growing to their full potential. See, so that could be not just healthcare costs or logical costs, but also costs, cultural costs to society. But anyways, just take this one here. Now the counter-argument section is like, you add the question mark here, because the question mark just simply demarcates that this is a counter-argument. You don't have to respond with the question, but you find a source that makes this claim. And there's a source there, there's a congressman. He says, well, they must like it because they stay. And of course, that's very male privilege point of view. So you quote that, this person said, they must like it, they stay. Basically, this person is dismissing any reasons for women staying. It's just basically victim blaming. And then you counter it by, find a source that says, of course, how would anybody like being abused? Or you can say, this is a very common misperception. Well, don't they stay for children's sake? And sure, there may be some women who stay because they bought into the idea that it's better to have a dual income or a strong male presence in the family. Again, that's a heteronormative privilege. But of course, it's a myth. It's a misperception. It's incorrect because it's based on male privilege. But also, you can use Michelle Berry as a counter. Because Michelle Berry, when you study the story, Michelle Berry risked her life and the life of her daughter, who was the child of rape from Ariel Castro, because Michelle Berry saw that Ariel Castro was grooming his own daughter for sexual abuse, so she risked everything to leave. So she left for the children's sake. Okay? The call to action. Remember, this is not a conclusion. Again, this number 1 is not an introduction. Number 5 is not a conclusion. Here you need sources to ask for solutions. So you're asking for society to think, feel, or do something. So in this case, you can come back to Steiner's calls to action. Steiner uses metaphors: shine the light, bring this issue out in the darkness, don't stigmatize women, need more resources for women, shelters for not just women, but women with children. So you can ask for solutions. Now, but be very careful here in the call to action. Do not fall into the trap of also further victim blaming. Don't say, well, the women just need more education. Come on, that's just a knee-jerk reaction, and it's incorrect, and it's actually distasteful, because what you're doing is just further blaming the woman. Oh, it's their fault. Okay, so do not ask or call for any type of education on the woman's part. You could argue that men need to be trained in identifying their male privilege and look at how toxic masculinity functions. So yes, you can ask for more curriculum in schools to address toxic masculinity. Okay, but be careful here in the call to action. Do not further victim blame. So you can address you can call these women victims initially, but eventually you have to call them survivors. Does it make sense? You no longer call them victims because they are survivors. All right. Remember, this is a source-based essay. I need sources for every section. One source, one paragraph for paragraph unity. And hope you can do a good job, and I'm sure you will. So anyways, thank you so much.